The wedding planner shoved the final invoice into my hands just as the music stopped. Across the room, the groom lowered the microphone, looked straight at my family, and quietly said, "Before I answer, someone here needs to tell the truth. My name is Amina Okoye, I'm 31, and I own a successful interior design firm in Lagos. My younger sister, Chisholm, had always been treated as the princess of our family, while I was expected to solve every financial problem without asking questions. When my mother demanded I pay $118,000 for my sister's dream wedding, she called it my duty as the eldest daughter. She never imagined that the biggest problem that day wouldn't be the bill. It would be the marriage itself. 3 weeks before my sister Chisholm's wedding, my mother invited our whole family to a big gathering. Everyone was smiling, laughing, and talking about the wedding. I thought we were only there to celebrate, but I had no idea my life was about to change. My mother stood up with a bright smile and tapped her glass for everyone's attention. Then she proudly announced that I had kindly agreed to pay every remaining wedding expense so Chisholm could have the perfect wedding she had always dreamed of. The room quickly filled with loud applause. My relatives smiled at me with pride, thanking me for being such a loving older sister. I froze in my chair. My heart started beating fast because I had never agreed to anything. No one had even asked me before making that announcement. When the gathering ended, I quietly asked my mother why she had said something that was not true. She looked at me without any guilt and said it was my duty as the eldest daughter. She told me I had a successful business, so I should be happy to help my sister. Then she warned me that if I refused, I would shame the whole family and destroy Chisholm's future. Her words hurt me deeply. I loved my sister, but I did not believe love should come through lies and pressure. I calmly told my mother that I could not pay a bill I had never agreed to. From that moment, everything changed. My relatives stopped smiling at me. Some called me selfish, while others said money had made me proud. Even people who did not know the truth began judging me. As I looked around the room, I noticed someone else was not smiling either. Chisholm's fiancé, Tendai Moyo, became quiet every time money was mentioned. The worry on his face told me he knew something was wrong, even if he had not yet said a single word. As the wedding day came closer, I hoped everything would calm down. Instead, the problems became bigger every single day. My phone started ringing from early morning until late at night. One after another, wedding vendors called me about unpaid bills. The florist asked when I would send the next payment. The catering company reminded me about a large balance that was still waiting. The decoration team wanted approval before they continued their work. Every person I spoke to believed I was the one paying for the wedding. I had no idea what they were talking about. I had never signed any agreement with them or promised to pay even $1. At first, I thought it was only one simple mistake. But when the emails started arriving, I realized something was seriously wrong. Every invoice had my company's name printed at the top. Some bills were for expensive flowers, luxury chairs, and decorations I had never even seen before. The total amount kept growing every time I opened a new email. I felt shocked, confused, and worried. Someone had connected my business to wedding expenses without asking for my permission. I decided to speak to my sister. I showed Chisholm the invoices and asked her why my company was listed on every payment. She looked just as surprised as I was. She said she had never handled the money herself because our mother had promised to take care of everything. Chisholm believed every decision was already under control, so she never checked the contracts or asked. It's the summer field loom, so can get your vet in almost, yeah, and get out with the fish, but see for the hell in the feet. Slide did me as a deep for cash did him sat a hand of mutton share, I did the hit when having it out with an owl. It's kind of, yeah, we so we're so I now for nimmer, just so out net, first in the gas on almost. I've get over snaps, and it I but such during all ones of sit that love, yeah, a master for the. At your fang or snickily resuhin it. Stashed up in these in the fear van the had net, and the just little snake up in the game on so much fit. Now I'm blood from the chow queen. I'm mad with what business it is at. You may fit out bills and arch and I'm gapes so get your fat be lobby. Stare Baba snaps, get for but a hurl snaps and gapes of Namaha on diddy. Stashed up and get a wolf in the servant day. Her own the beams out, but then it must did him daily out in it. Amy Lockers are not that nearly in what I can see. As if Nicola or Sad de Loch Baileys and the snat over of Machnot Billy. Amy is me again, named Fat Other Dale. He'll leave Micker the Murdis Harshish. Snitch talking at. Unforgettable, and that money should not become a problem. But Tendai did not seem satisfied. He politely asked again who had approved all those changes and who was actually paying for them. Before my mother could answer, she looked toward the door and saw me standing there. Her face changed immediately. She quickly smiled, walked toward me, and started talking about completely different things. She asked if the flowers looked beautiful and whether the guests would like the decorations. It was obvious she did not want Tendai to continue asking questions in front of me. The strange conversation stayed in my mind for the rest of the day. That evening, after most people had left the venue, Tendai quietly walked over to me. He looked nervous, as if he had been thinking about something for a long time. He asked if we could speak in private. Once we were alone, he looked directly at me and asked one simple question. Amina, did you really agree to pay for this entire wedding? I did not hesitate. I looked him in the eyes and said no. No one ever asked me. I never agreed to pay for any of this. For a few seconds, he said nothing. The surprise on his face was impossible to hide. He slowly shook his head, trying to understand what he had just heard. It was clear that someone had told him a completely different story. At that moment, I realized we had both been kept in the dark. Whatever was happening behind the scenes was much bigger than a misunderstanding about money, and the truth was starting to come closer than ever before. 2 days later, I received an urgent phone call from the wedding planner. Her voice was full of worry. She asked me to come to her office as soon as possible because several luxury vendors were refusing to continue their work. They said too many payments were overdue, and unless someone accepted full responsibility for the remaining balance, they would cancel their services before the wedding day. I was confused because I had never promised to pay anything. Still, I went to the meeting because I wanted to understand what was really happening. When I arrived, the wedding planner, a few vendors, my mother, and Chisholm were already sitting around a large table. The atmosphere was tense. The planner opened a thick file filled with contracts, payment records, and invoices. As she explained the situation, I felt my heart sink. The wedding budget had almost doubled since the first plan. New charges had been added every week. There were luxury flowers from another country, expensive table decorations, extra live entertainment, designer furniture, and many other upgrades. I could not believe how much money had been added without anyone questioning it. Then the planner placed several approval forms in front of me. She pointed to the signature at the bottom of each page and calmly said these documents showed that I had approved the extra expenses. I picked up the papers and stared at them in disbelief. My name was there, but I knew immediately that I had never signed those forms. The handwriting looked similar to mine, but it was not my signature. Someone had signed my name without my permission. I looked around the room and asked the only question that mattered. Who signed these papers? No one answered. Chisholm looked confused. The vendors looked at my mother. Even the wedding planner seemed surprised by my reaction. Before anyone could speak, my mother quickly stood up from her chair. She forced a smile and said this was not the right time for arguments. She insisted that everyone should focus on the wedding first and discuss the paperwork after the ceremony was over. Then she told the planner to continue preparing for the event as planned. I could not believe what I was hearing. This was no longer a simple misunderstanding or a family disagreement. Someone had used my name to approve thousands of dollars in expenses, and my mother wanted everyone to pretend nothing had happened. As we left the meeting, I realized the truth was becoming impossible to hide. No matter how hard someone tried to bury it, after the emergency meeting, everything felt different. Most people were busy talking about flowers, dresses, and the wedding ceremony, but Tendai seemed focused on something else. He was no longer acting like a groom who was only counting the days until his wedding. Instead, he started asking careful questions that no one expected. He wanted to see every contract, every payment schedule, and every guest list. He politely asked for copies of the documents and spent hours reading through them. The more he looked, the more serious he became. Without telling many people, Tendai began calling the vendors himself. He spoke with the catering company, the decoration team, the florist, the photographer, and the event manager. He asked each of them the same simple question: who approved these extra expenses? The answers were never the same. One vendor said my mother had personally requested the upgrades. Another said someone claimed to be speaking for my company. A third said the changes were approved by a family representative. Every conversation created more questions instead of giving clear answers. Nothing matched. It was as if everyone had been told a different story. As Tendai continued asking questions, my family became more uncomfortable. Whenever he brought up money or contracts, my mother quickly changed the subject. Some relatives told him to stop worrying and enjoy his wedding. Others laughed and said he was thinking too much. But instead of calming him, their reactions only made him more determined to find the truth. Chisholm did not understand what was happening. She thought Tendai was simply feeling nervous before the wedding, like many people do. She kept telling him that everything would be fine once the ceremony was over. She believed all the stress would disappear after they were married. But I could see something that she could not. This was no longer about expensive flowers or unpaid bills. Tendai was quietly putting together small pieces of a much larger puzzle. Every answer he received uncovered another secret. Every document raised another question. I had a strong feeling that before the wedding day arrived, the truth would finally come into the open, and nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The wedding day finally arrived. The beautiful hall was filled with family members, friends, and smiling guests. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes, and the decorations made the place look like a dream. Soft music played as Chisholm walked down the aisle wearing her white wedding dress. She looked happy, and for a moment, I hoped all the problems from the past few weeks would stay hidden so she could enjoy her special day. I sat quietly, watching everything, but deep inside, I felt nervous. Too many questions had never been answered. The ceremony began, and everything seemed normal. The officiant welcomed everyone and spoke about love, trust, and honesty. Chisholm smiled at Tendai with hope in her eyes. Tendai smiled back, but I could see he was carrying a heavy burden. He looked calm on the outside, yet his face showed he was thinking about something important. As the ceremony moved forward, the room became completely silent. The officiant reached the final part of the vows. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for the moment when Tendai would say the words everyone had come to hear. Before the officiant could ask the final question, Tendai slowly raised his hand. "Please," he said politely, "I need a few minutes before we continue." A wave of confusion spread across the room. Guests looked at one another, whispering quietly. Some thought he had forgotten his vows. Others believed he was simply overwhelmed by emotion. Chisholm looked surprised and gently asked if everything was all right. Tendai took a deep breath and looked around the room. Then he spoke in a calm but steady voice. "I cannot promise a lifetime of honesty while there are serious questions that have not been answered. Before I say these vows, there is one issue I can no longer ignore." The room fell into complete silence. My mother's face changed immediately. She quickly stood up and told Tendai to stop talking. She said this was not the time for questions, and that everyone was waiting for the ceremony to continue. She urged him to finish the wedding first and discuss everything later. But Tendai did not move. He looked at the officiant, then at my sister, and finally at the rest of our family. With complete confidence, he quietly said, "No. I cannot continue until the truth is spoken." In that moment, every smile in the room disappeared, and everyone realized this wedding was no longer going according to plan. Tendai stood quietly in front of everyone, holding a small folder in his hands. No one spoke. Every guest was waiting to hear what he was about to say. He looked at my sister with kindness, then turned toward both families. His voice was calm, but every word was clear. I am not stopping this wedding because of money, he said. Money can be earned again. Trust is much harder to rebuild. He slowly opened the folder and removed several copies of contracts and payment records. He explained that over the past few days, he had spoken with many vendors and carefully compared every document. What he discovered made it impossible for him to continue the ceremony without telling the truth. He showed that several contracts had been changed after they were first signed. Expensive upgrades had been added without his knowledge. Payment guarantees had been placed under my business, even though I had never agreed to take responsibility for the costs. Some vendors had been told that I had happily accepted every expense and would pay whatever was needed. Others were given completely different stories. Each person had been led to believe something that was not true. Tendai looked directly at the guests and said, "A marriage should begin with honesty, not with hidden decisions and false promises." The room became completely still. People looked at one another, trying to understand what they had just heard. Some relatives lowered their heads. Others stared at my mother, waiting for her to explain. Chisholm looked shocked as she realized how much had been hidden from her. Tears filled her eyes because she understood that she had believed everything without asking questions. Then Tendai spoke once more. "I still care deeply about Chisholm. This is not about rejecting her. But I cannot stand here and promise a lifetime of honesty while our first day together is built on deception. If we ignore the truth today, we will carry that lie into our marriage." No one argued with him. No one clapped. No one even whispered. A heavy silence filled the entire hall. In that quiet moment, every beautiful decoration, every expensive flower, and every perfect plan lost its meaning because the truth had finally come into the open. For several long moments, no one moved. The wedding hall was so quiet that everyone could feel the weight of what had just happened. Chisholm stood frozen, unable to believe everything she had heard. She slowly looked at Tendai, then at me, and finally at our mother. Her eyes were filled with confusion and pain. The happy smile she had worn only minutes earlier was gone. The wedding planner quietly walked toward her and placed a thick file of contracts and payment records into her hands. With shaking fingers, Chisholm opened the file for the first time. She had trusted our mother to handle every detail, so she had never bothered to read the documents herself. Page after page, she carefully looked through the contracts. She saw expensive upgrades she had never requested. She found payment guarantees connected to my business. She noticed changes made after the original plans had been approved. The more she read, the more her face changed. Finally, she looked up at our mother. "Did you really do all this without telling us?" she asked softly. Our mother tried to explain that she only wanted to give her daughter the perfect wedding. She said she believed everything would work out in the end. She insisted she was only trying to protect the family's image and make sure the celebration looked impressive in front of relatives and friends. But this time, Chisholm did not accept those answers. Tears rolled down her face as she slowly closed the file. She realized the beautiful wedding she had dreamed about had become more important than honesty. Instead of bringing the family together, it had filled everyone with lies, pressure, and broken trust. She understood that I had been blamed for something I had never agreed to, while Tendai had been kept in the dark from the beginning. For the first time in many years, my sister stood beside me instead of against me. She looked directly at our mother and quietly said, "I wanted a marriage built on love, not a wedding built on secrets." Our mother had no answer. Around us, the guests began picking up their bags and slowly walking toward the exit. No one left because the ceremony had stopped. They left because the picture-perfect celebration they believed in no longer existed. The expensive decorations were still beautiful, but they could no longer hide the truth. In just a few minutes, every false appearance had disappeared, leaving only honesty behind. Several days passed after the wedding was called off. The excitement had disappeared, and the silence in our family felt heavier than ever. Everyone had time to think about what had happened. There were no more arguments, no more excuses, and no more plans for a perfect celebration. The only thing left was the truth. One afternoon, Tendai asked Chisholm to meet him at a quiet cafe. He wanted to speak with her away from the pressure of both families. Chisholm was nervous because she did not know what he would say. She feared he had come to end their relationship forever. When they sat together, Tendai looked at her with kindness. He gently took her hand and said, "I still love you. My feelings for you have not changed." I did not stop the wedding because I wanted to leave you. I stopped it because I want our marriage to begin with honesty. If we ignore what happened, the same problems will follow us for the rest of our lives." Chisholm listened quietly, and tears filled her eyes. She finally understood that Tendai had been protecting their future, not trying to destroy it. She thanked him for telling the truth, even though it had been painful for everyone. Later that evening, Chisholm came to see me. We had spent years growing apart because our mother always treated us differently. I had often been expected to carry every responsibility, while she was protected from every problem. For a long time, neither of us had noticed how much that favoritism had hurt our relationship. She looked at me with regret and said, "Amina, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you. I believed everything without asking questions, and I allowed the distance between us to grow. You did not deserve the way our family treated you." Her words meant more to me than any apology I had ever received. I hugged her, and for the first time in years, we truly felt like sisters again. Our mother watched everything quietly. She finally realized that spending money to impress other people had cost her something much greater. She had almost lost the trust of both her daughters and nearly destroyed Chisholm's future. At last, she understood that appearances can be replaced, but broken family relationships are much harder to repair. Several months later, life looked very different from the way it had on that painful wedding day. There were no grand announcements, no expensive decorations, and no pressure to impress anyone. This time, Tendai and Chisholm made every decision together. They planned a small and simple wedding with only close family members and true friends who genuinely cared about their happiness. The ceremony was not filled with luxury, but it was filled with peace, respect, and honest smiles. Before making any payment, they both reviewed every contract together. They carefully discussed each expense and agreed on a budget they could comfortably afford. No one made secret decisions. No one signed papers for someone else. Every vendor knew exactly who was responsible for each payment. There were no hidden promises, no surprise bills, and no unfair expectations placed on anyone. For the first time, everyone involved understood that honesty was far more valuable than an expensive celebration. I attended the wedding with a peaceful heart. As I watched my sister and Tendai exchange their vows, I could see something that had been missing before. They were not standing together because everything was perfect. They were standing together because they had faced a difficult truth and chosen to rebuild their relationship with trust instead of fear. My relationship with Chisholm also began to change. We started calling each other more often, meeting for lunch, and talking openly about our lives. We no longer allowed old misunderstandings or our mother's favoritism to come between us. We listened to each other, respected each other's feelings, and slowly became sisters again, not because someone forced us to, but because we both wanted to heal. Even our mother changed with time. She stopped worrying so much about what other people thought and began focusing on repairing the relationships she had almost lost. It was not easy, but she finally understood that love cannot grow where honesty is missing. As I watched my sister smile on her wedding day, I realized I had learned a lesson that would stay with me forever. A beautiful wedding lasts only one day, but trust is the foundation of a lifetime. A wedding can always be postponed until the right time, but trust cannot be borrowed, bought, or built on lies. Once it is broken, it can only return through truth, patience, and honest hearts. Some families spend years protecting appearances. The strongest families are the ones willing to protect the truth instead. If you were in Amina's position, would you have paid the bill or walked away? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional family dramas.